Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into an absolutely massive saga today. We're looking at human history not as some dusty, boring list of dates, but as an epic, non-stop relay race. It's a huge, millennia-spanning story packed with ambition, wild innovation, and, quite honestly, a lot of chaos. We're distilling the entire history of the world into a rapid-fire narrative to help you actually see the big picture. So, let's get into it.
For the last 5,000 years, humanity has been absolutely obsessed with one incredibly dangerous question. Who gets to rule the world? This single question is the engine driving our entire story today. And it all kicks off right between two rivers in ancient Iraq. We've got the first civilizations building these massive pyramid-shaped towers, inventing writing out of thin air, and dividing days into hours, minutes, and seconds. But, it didn't take long for someone to look at all those independent, slightly disorganized cities and think, hey, that's a prime opportunity for absolute control.
Enter Sargon, the guy who built the very first empire. When someone basically asked if he ruled for the benefit of his people, his response was a hard, undeniable no. Sargon said, "Kings don't rule for the benefit of the people. We rule to increase our pride, power, and possessions." He conquered neighboring cities explicitly for his own gain, and boom, the template for the next 5 millennia was set. It's pretty wild, right? Because we still see echoes of that exact same ambition today, that relentless pursuit of growth, often at the expense of everyone else.
5,000 years ago, you had the Sumerians and the Egyptians. Fast forward a bit to 4,000 years ago and the Babylonians pop up. 3,000 years ago, the Assyrians. You can literally watch this chaotic cycle just spin faster and faster. The map was constantly being redrawn as everyone violently vied for the top spot. But right as bronze was going out of fashion and these early military empires were mysteriously crumbling, a totally different kind of power grab was quietly happening.
This is where the Phoenicians and Canaanites enter the competition, and they didn't do it with massive armies. No, they brought an idea that completely changed the game: the alphabet. They took their word for ox, Aleph, and their word for house, Beit, and put those sounds together: Aleph, Beit, alphabet. By just linking sounds, they created infinite words. We actually have evidence of this being used over 3,500 years ago on something as mundane as a lice comb. It was such a brilliant, efficient invention that the idea just spread like wildfire. It's a fantastic reminder that sometimes the absolute most powerful conquests are cultural, not military.
Now, while empires were clashing in the Middle East, some truly incredible minds over in the East were trying to figure out how to organize human behavior in the middle of all this chaos. In China, you had Confucius, essentially teaching people to be nice and rule well to stop societal breakdown. Meanwhile, Lao Tzu offered a radically different approach. He taught people to just let go and go with the flow of nature. And down in India, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama became enlightened under a tree, searching for a permanent way to escape human suffering altogether. Everyone, everywhere, was just desperately searching for some kind of order. But back in the West, that search for order was a whole lot bloodier. The brand new Athenian democracy managed to seriously anger the expanding Persian Empire by burning the city of Sardis. And the Persian king's response? Well, it tells you everything you need to know. He said, "No, you fool, we're going to burn Athens." They wanted absolute revenge. And even though the Athenians actually slaughtered them at Marathon initially, the Persians eventually came back, kicking off a massive, centuries-long rivalry. All this intense friction birthed legendary thinkers: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. And Aristotle ended up teaching a kid named Alexander the Great. Alexander decided to take ultimate revenge on the Persians. First step, conquering the known world and declaring himself a god. But here's the catch: absolute power is incredibly fragile. Step 2, Alexander dies. So much for being an immortal god, right? And step 3, his generals immediately turn on each other and completely carve up his massive empire. It just proves that a kingdom built entirely on one massive ego rarely survives without them. It wasn't just generals claiming territory, though. Right alongside these military conquests, the major world religions were fundamentally redrawing the global map. Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam spread incredibly fast across entire continents. And they often faced brutal pushback, like early Christians literally being thrown to lions by the Romans. But these belief systems adapted, they survived, and they grew so undeniably massive that eventually even Roman emperors like Constantine had to align with them just to keep their grip on power.
Over in the first millennium BC, you had the Shang and Zhou dynasties. Moving into the first millennium AD, the Qin and Han. Then the second millennium AD brought the Jin and Tang.
It's this massive, sweeping ebb and flow. Sometimes China was unified as this unstoppable powerhouse. Other times, it completely fractured into like 16 different warring states. But through all that breaking apart and coming back together, they were driving unmatched technological innovation. I mean, they were building giant walls and inventing paper and printing way before the West even caught on.
Meanwhile, a massive shakeup happened among the Arab clans, who have been violently fighting each other for centuries. A man named Muhammad challenged their local stone idols. He literally asked, "Can't the idols defend themselves? How? They're made out of stones, you know? Makes sense, right?" He successfully united these fractured clans under the banner of Islam. And because they were no longer allowed to fight each other, all that combined energy turned outward. They rapidly expanded, creating an empire bigger than anything the world had ever seen up to that point.
Which tosses us right into the messy, multi-cornered brawl that was the Middle Ages. The Islamic empires expanded until the Franks finally stopped them in Europe. Then you have the Vikings sweeping down from the icy north, basically stealing everyone's stuff and settling everywhere from Russia to Normandy to Greenland. At the exact same time, the Seljuk Turks convert to Islam and capture Byzantine territory, which directly causes the Pope to launch the Crusades, a really brutal series of holy wars where Christians marched out to fight for and plunder the Holy Land.
And as if that global scramble wasn't chaotic enough, imagine this. One-third of Europe's entire population was completely wiped out by the bubonic plague, or the Black Death. Genghis Khan and the Mongols were busy conquering twice as much land as Alexander the Great, but their massive trade routes actually inadvertently helped spread this devastating disease. It was like a giant reset button being slammed on the board of human history right at the moment when empires were stretching their borders to the absolute limit.
Reeling from the plague, Europe moved into the Renaissance, which triggered an intense tightening of power. Ruling the world didn't just mean owning land anymore, it meant brutally policing what people believed behind closed doors. The Spanish Inquisition famously burned heretics, forced conversions, and openly declared, "We're checking to see if the Jewish Catholics are secretly keeping the Sabbath." They ruthlessly expelled anyone who didn't fall in line, consolidating absolute power just in time for the age of exploration.
This new era brought a horrifying shift, turning actual human beings into literal commodities. The Portuguese built this massive trading empire based on a brutally efficient mechanical cycle. Step 1, trade goods for enslaved people in Africa. Step 2, trade those enslaved people for food and resources. Step 3, trade that food for more stuff back in Europe. Step 4, rinse and repeat. It was a completely mechanized cycle of human exploitation fueling global expansion, and it set a very dark, very real precedent for centuries to come.
At this point, we're looking at two absolute global superpowers. Spain sails west, bumps into the Americas, and conquers the incredibly complex Aztec and Inca empires, pulling out just staggering amounts of gold and silver. Portugal, on the other hand, completely bypasses the old Silk Road to build this highly lucrative Asian trading empire by sea. They were both grabbing so much land so fast that to avoid an all-out war, they literally drew a line down a map and tried to split the entire world in half. Just, you take this half, we'll take that half.
But holding on to absolute power? It's tough, especially when disruptive tech hits the market. Rulers started using the brand new printing press. A German priest named Martin Luther practically became the world's first mass media influencer, igniting the Protestant Reformation. And when the Pope refused to let King Henry VIII get a divorce, Henry famously just said, "I will make it legal," and broke England entirely away from the Catholic Church. So you mix personal desires with the rapid spread of information, and the absolute power of the Church is fractured forever.
That massive fracturing of power finally trickled all the way down to everyday people, setting off a rapid-fire chain of revolutions. Kings claimed they ruled the world, but the people finally started fighting back. The Americans threw off the British over taxes. The French violently dismantled their monarchy, which led to Napoleon trying to take over Europe. And watching all this, Simon Bolivar led a massive wave of uprisings across Latin America. The old-school idea of divinely appointed kings was literally being dismantled piece by piece. Now, while everyone else was fighting for liberty, the British, they decided to fight for pure efficiency. They sparked an industrial revolution, harnessing steam power to make manufacturing unbelievably fast and cheap. But of course, they needed a place to sell all those goods, so they built an unstoppable second empire. They used massive naval dominance to enforce their rules, established places like Australia, and even used their military to force trade, like pushing opium sales onto places like China. Okay, let's look at another major player's epic, almost unbelievable transformation: Russia. Step 1, it starts super humbly with Vikings setting up a kingdom near Kyiv. Step 2, they get completely overrun by the Mongols. But Step 3, they finally shake off the Mongols, and Ivan the Terrible steps up, claims Moscow is the third Rome, and takes the title of Tsar. Step 4 is just massive, relentless expansion across Asia. Russian explorers even bumped into the penguins of Antarctica just days before the British did.
So, the great powers keep getting bigger, and newly united nations like Italy and Germany look around and want in on the action. They start asking a very dangerous question: what can we colonize? They desperately wanted a seat at the empire table. And that exact question triggered the infamous Scramble for Africa, which they tried to justify with this terrible pseudoscience claiming Europeans were somehow evolved to be the fittest to rule.
But let's be clear, that justification was completely historically blind. Long before Europeans showed up for their scramble, Africa was already home to a massive list of rich, powerful empires. Egypt, Kush, Aksum, Mali, the Zulus, the kingdoms of Benin and Asante, the Kingdom of Congo, and the absolute architectural marvels of Great Zimbabwe. Africa had been shaped by incredibly complex, thriving societies for centuries before Europe arbitrarily decided to carve it up.
And this brings us to a really terrifying geographical limit. The great powers, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, have expanded absolutely everywhere. But the map is full. There's literally nowhere left to expand on the entire globe, except into the territories of the one empire that is actively falling apart, the crumbling Ottoman Empire. Everyone is suddenly eyeing the exact same limited piece of real estate.
What makes this full map so incredibly volatile is that all this cutthroat global competition has pushed humanity into an era of crazy world-connecting technology. You've got telegraphs, telephones, airships, airplanes, massive steel battleships, and stealthy submarines. Suddenly, empires aren't fighting with horses and muskets. They are heavily armed with unprecedented tech. The stakes have absolutely never been higher, and the weapons have never been deadlier.
Which leaves us hanging right on the edge of a very sharp precipice. Our central conflict, who gets to rule the world, has escalated over 5,000 years just to arrive at this exact explosive moment. The map is completely full, the world is instantly connected, and competing empires are armed to the teeth with devastating new weapons. So what happens next? I think we all know what happens next. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning the history around you.